Hey everybody, welcome back to the Entrepreneur's Essentials. We are now about to delve into chapter 11 and we're finally in the building section of the book. So this is for people, you've already decided to start a business, you're now in it, and now you need advice on how to best build your business. So let me jump right in with, frankly, the most important thing, which is how to hire people. So this is chapter 11, the most proven way to hire well. For this selection from the Entrepreneur's Essentials, I've got a very special lesson for you. This is the lesson that has been shared more than any other from Lucky7.io over the years, and I believe it is the one that has had the biggest impact on Austin's startup culture. It is all about how well you hire the best and the amazing impact doing so will have on your culture. We've followed this lesson since the beginning of Data.World, and Brant and I developed it since the beginning of Bazaar Voice before. So here we go with this lesson from the Entrepreneur's Essentials. It was first shared at Lucky7 on January 7th, 2013. I had made very few edits to the original post below, mostly in the area of readability and grammar, not in substance of content. I often get asked by entrepreneurs, what is the most important thing I can do to build a great culture? And my answer always is recruiting. Recruiting has to be a top 3 priority for any CEO, for any size organization. But as a startup, it is the difference between life and death. When Brant and I started Bazaar Voice, we wanted to get the team right from the beginning. We were obsessive about that, and it paid huge dividends later on. If there was ever a secret to Bazaar Voice's success in those early days, both culturally and performance-wise, it was that we obsessed about recruiting and also constantly debated how we would create a great culture. More on this second point in a later lesson. Brant and I came up with a process for recruiting that was so obvious in hindsight, but yet is so rarely done. Many executives, especially experienced ones, believe that their gut instinct on people is what matters most. For those executives, I recommend you read the book Egonomics because you are dead wrong. You must test those that you want to hire. Many candidates will say that they are passionate about joining your company, but they don't know that. No one knows if they are truly passionate about joining your cause until they experience it. It is all romance in the beginning. For example, I may have thought I was passionate about learning to play guitar like David Gilmour of Pink Floyd when I saw him play and he makes the guitar sing. And I've had this thought as a teenager. But then I tried guitar lessons and I quickly realized it is not for me. Now let's compare that with how badly I wanted to get into the Wharton School to earn my MBA. At the time I applied, Wharton's MBA program was ranked #1 in the country for the prior 6 years. It was very intimidating to apply and face potential rejection. So I prepared for 2 months, studying for the GMAT, writing and rewriting my essays, which Deborah would critique and often tell me to start over, and I got in, and it changed my life. Book note, 2 years later, I wrote about my journey as a young entrepreneur there in this Lucky7.io post, and I linked to that post on Medium here. So given that background and being tested so much to get into Wharton, at Core Metrics, I suggested to one of our vice presidents that they test their candidates. They shrugged it off and said they trust their instincts, and it was too competitive of a job market to slow the process down. This is a very common excuse, by the way. I didn't know better at the time, and they were much older and experienced than I was, so I let them run with that plan. But they were wrong 50% of the time 6 months later. This means that around 50% of the time after their new hire had been at Core Metrics for 6 months, either they left on their own because they realized they weren't a great fit, or they were fired for lack of performance. The answer to this? It's all a numbers game, I was told. And not just by that executive, but by other CEOs. How sad. This was an industry norm. Meanwhile, it is embarrassing to you, the person that didn't work out, and to your entire company. It is disruptive to your culture and your performance. Think about the opportunity cost alone. Startups are very hard. The last thing you want is a constant turnover and an attitude of, it's all a numbers game, like it is a soulless factory or something. These are people. It is their livelihood, and it's yours too. So the simple process Brant, Barden, and I came up with was the test. The first person to join me and Brant at Bizarre Voice was indeed the first person to go through the test. This was Paul Rogers, our first VP of Engineering, and now the Chief Technology Officer at Whale Shark Media. Booknote, later renamed to Retail Me Not, and I wrote about Cotter Cunningham's amazing journey from failure to success in chapter 21 on failure and resilience. The way it worked was simple. When we got to our finalists after 5 to 8 interviews and everyone was ready to hire them, we would call them up, typically on a Friday, and say, "Congratulations, everyone at Bizarre Voice that you interviewed with wants to hire you." And we would let that soak in. As Bizarre Voice became known for culture, that really soaked in. It was like a badge of honor to get to that point, as we were one of the hardest companies to get a job with and also as one of the best performing. But then we would drop the hammer and say, there's this one more thing we need you to do as part of this process. And that was the test. Similar to me trying guitar lessons back in the day to see if my passion stuck, we wanted them to get a small taste of what the job would be like. For example, for a sales director candidate, we would continue and say, we need you to come in on Monday and present to us like we are a prospect. This was exceptionally hard for a candidate to prepare for in the early days because our company was in stealth mode, as I wrote about in chapter 8, To Be Stealthy or Not. It would ruin the candidate's weekend as they spent 8 to 16 hours preparing. I put ruin in quotes because it wasn't nearly as bad as either one of us making the wrong decision about their candidacy at Bizarre Voice. Again, we wanted to avoid the embarrassment, impact to our culture, and lost opportunity cost. If you step back for a moment and think about it, spending 8 to 16 hours is nothing for a job that could both transform your personal wealth and fulfill your soul, your calling in life. During the presentation, we would interrupt the sales candidates, push them hard on lessons on items like pricing, which they couldn't possibly know at this point, and essentially act out a tough prospect environment to see how they would react. We knew how to sell ourselves, and it is important that when a candidate is being tested or proven in that area, team members are in the room to critique them. The test was much harder for executives, and our recruiters really groaned when we got to this point. It is, after all, harder to find that right executive versus the right salesperson. For their test, I told executive candidates, I need you to present your 100-day plan to the executive team, what you plan to accomplish at Bizarre Voice in your first 100 days. I remember when one of our executive candidates called me from Spain, where he was on vacation at the time, and said, you weren't specific about something. I assume it is okay if I ask my peers and potential team members what they think is most important for me to accomplish and what the company's biggest priorities are? Bingo, I replied. Congratulations. You passed IQ test number 1, which is to assume that all resources are available to you in startups, and even when constraints are forced upon you, find a way. He laughed and then spent around 50 to 60 hours preparing for his presentation, and it was one of the best in Bizarre Voice's history. It was not unusual for an executive candidate to spend 40 hours preparing for this. What was unusual is when they didn't prepare at all. For example, I had some CFO candidates who literally didn't pass IQ test number 1 and presented a very generic, here's the job of a CFO presentation. Clearly, they didn't have the passion to prepare, but even worse, they didn't have the collaborative gene, which is essential to perform in a startup environment where resources and your very existence as a company are so limited. Even worse than that, some would say when they face the rejection, but you didn't tell me I should prepare that way. I was very direct in my reply to that, and I hope that I helped them succeed in their career later. Life is too short to not live your passion. We spend more waking time at work than doing anything else. What were the results? Well, we were wrong about new team members a lot less than core metrics. Around 10 to 20% of the time instead of around 50% of the time. And our sales defied gravity as compared to most startups in Austin. And in 7 years, we built a public company worth around $700 million today. And as importantly, our process helped keep the best people at Bizarre Voice. Around 50% of our new team members came from referrals. When I asked new people why they joined Bizarre Voice, the people was always one of their top 3 answers. When I asked people why they stayed at Bizarre Voice, the people was always one of their top 3 answers too. Bizarre Voice became an elite type of club, a badge of honor to get through that brutal recruiting process, not unlike what I saw or felt myself at Wharton with other recently admitted students. And momentum begets momentum. This is true on the recruiting front, just like it is true in any area. For example, fundraising, sales, culture, a winning spirit, and results, etc. What made me write this post today is that I was recently texting with the CEO of a company we recently backed, and I have agreed to be the CEO's primary mentor. We were texting about recruiting, and I encouraged him to spend a tremendous amount of time recruiting your first 50 people because they will set the tone, both culturally and performance-wise, for your next 450 people. I don't need to tell him about the test, though, because he lived it at Bizarre Voice. By the way, it put a smile on my face that as I wrote most of this post last night, our daughter was practicing guitar in the same room, but she is doing much better than I did at that after 2 years of working at it versus my feeble 2-week attempt. Note, this was originally posted on my blog at lucky7.io, where I've been writing about primarily entrepreneurship since 2012. The original post is there, along with an interesting comments thread from 5 years ago. And of course, I linked to that on Medium. Years after writing this post, I was having lunch with John Mackey, the co-founder and CEO of Whole Foods. I told him about how we uniquely hired at Bizarre Voice, and he shared a similar story on how they did it at Whole Foods. They would have their candidate answer questions with all of the interviewers present, surrounding them in a kind of circle. This way, all objections and clarifications were clearly out there on the table for all to hear, creating a more collaborative assessment and eventual buy-in on the candidate. And then for most of their candidates that passed, they would hire them for 30 days and determine after that whether or not to convert them into a full-time hire. That is an extended test for sure. Does it sound intense? Well, ask yourself, does Whole Foods have one of the most respected business cultures in the world? Amazon clearly thought so, and so did Fortune magazine in their 100 best places to work list year after year, and I link to that here on Medium. As I mentioned at data.world, we practiced this since the beginning, And it still surprises me how often we're wrong when we get to the test process, and how thankful I am that we practice this. It is painful when we are wrong, but it would be much more painful if we were wrong for 6 months or more and had to let the person go. We have an incredibly strong team as a result of this practice, and I feel very thankful to work with them. I believe this post has been adopted by more startups in Austin than any other I've written. We've gone from a norm of guessing to a norm of proving here, and I believe it is directly correlated with the success of startups in Austin overall. Opportunity cost is a real cost, and time is money in a startup's life. I would love to hear about your unique process to hire the best. What resonates with you in this lesson? Do you have some form of test for your new hires? Or do you do something else? If you've gotten this far, I have one favor to ask as Data.World CEO. We're hiring for multiple roles right now, and I would really appreciate you helping us get the word out. This is the most ambitious company I've ever been a part of, and the best time to join us as we rapidly take off. Please share this link, which I link to here on Medium, and candidates can apply there as well. And if you're wondering, the t-shirt I'm wearing today is from the 2017 anniversary at Data.World, when we were celebrating 2 years of our existence as a startup and about 1 year since our launch on July 11th of 2016. We had just hit around 100,000 community members on the free part of our platform for open data. And we were off and running, and on the back of this shirt are tour dates. This is like a concert t-shirt where Sparkle is, really branching out, and you can just hear the guitar music playing. And on the back are milestones in the form of concert tour dates, 10 big milestones that were achieved in 2017. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you on the next chapter.